Let's go ahead and write that down in the first blank there. Can I trust the church? When I was a pastor in Chicago, I had the opportunity to see many people leave my church because I was there for 5 years, and the longer you're a pastor, the more people you see leave. And one of the families who left was a family that was really disgruntled and confused and really just sort of, they weren't exactly sure what was going on with our ministry at the church. They seemed to be just completely angry about everything. And we actually had a mediator come in, and we sat down across the table, this family and me, and I went through a whole list of all the things that I possibly thought I could have done wrong, and I apologized to them. And then the mediator looked over to them and they said, okay, what would you guys like to say? Is there anything that you feel you need to apologize for? And they sat there and they thought, no, not really. And we were looking at each other, and through the course of like a 3-hour meeting, at the end of the meeting, I was out getting some water. Well, we took a little break. I was out getting some water at the water fountain, and the mediator came up to me. She kind of tapped me on the shoulder and looked into my eyes and gave me kind of an encouraging look and said, I have never experienced anything like what's going on here. Like they were just so hardened to something, and we couldn't figure out what it was. We couldn't get to the root of it. Eventually, they left the church and found another church. Well, this happened a few times until finally there was one point in time where there was a family that was really disgruntled about one particular leadership issue in the church. Someone wanted to be a leader in the church, but they weren't ready for it or qualified for it, and so they couldn't get there, and so they were really kind of upset about it. And we were dealing with them on that issue and trying to encourage them and help that person to grow into a leadership position. And instead, they just decided to get really, animosity stuff with the church and started sending out letters telling everybody that the church was dying unless something were to change and this person were put in charge. And it was really kind of just a hard thing, and I was wondering, how do we deal with this? And so, since we've been through that a few times before, I said to my leadership team, I said, we're going to deal with this biblically. And we opened up the Bible, went to Matthew chapter 18, where it talks about how to deal with conflict. And we started working through the process, bit by bit. And we got halfway into the process, and it turned out that this family was just completely unwilling, this one person in particular, was completely unwilling to interact with what the Bible said on any of this issue, on any of these issues. And so we then asked that person, and therefore the family, to go ahead and move on. But you know what? They went to another church, and that person got into a position of leadership. This is the deal, okay? The deal is that if you don't like this church, you can go to a different one. If you don't like Target, you can go to a different one. If you don't like Walmart, you can go to a different one. If you don't like Marsh, you can go to Payless, and if you don't like Payless, you can go to Meijer, and if you don't like Meijer, you can go somewhere else. I don't know, but the thing is that we live in a consumeristic society, and there are all these different options, and if you want to go hide somewhere, spiritually speaking, you can. And if I offend you, you don't have to grow. You can go. Or you could say, you know what? There's something about what God is doing in the church, not necessarily this church, but in the church of God, somehow spiritually, that if I hang around long enough, just maybe I will grow from it. Just maybe I'll become a stronger person. And that's the real question. The question is not, can I hang out longer? Can I trust it? Can I trust God and His plan for the church? Can I trust this individual church? It's a big question, and how you answer that will change many things. But I have a scary answer for you. Here is the scary answer in 2 parts. There is only one church, and life is found nowhere else. We're going to look at the passage in the Bible that proves this. But there is only one church, and life is found nowhere else. If you leave one church, you haven't left the church. You may have left this particular fellowship, but you haven't left the church. And if you continue to run from different local churches, the one church is something that you're just sort of skirting on the top, kind of like a water beetle who's surfing along the top of the water and never actually getting into it. If you jump from church building to church building to church fellowship, then you're just skirting along the surface and you're never actually getting into the church. Until you get into the church, according to the Bible, you cannot find life. And that doesn't mean you have to attend church in order to go to heaven. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read for you what Jesus says about the church, and you make your own judgment based on that. So if you would, find your Bibles open to Matthew chapter 16. beginning in verse 13. And if you're using the Bibles that we passed out, it's on page 681. Go ahead and open that up, and we're going to do a little bit of reading. Matthew 16, beginning in verse 13. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by man, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he warned his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Christ. I'm going to keep reading till the end of the chapter, so go along with me. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, chief priests, and teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. "Never, Lord," he said, "this shall never happen to you." Jesus turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of men." Then Jesus said to his disciples, "If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me will find it. What good will it be for a man if he gains the whole world, yet forfeits his soul? Or what can a man give in exchange for his soul? For the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels, and there he will reward each person according to what he's done. I tell you the truth, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." Jesus says, at the very beginning, he says, "Who am I? Who do people say that I am? Who do you say that I am?" And immediately, as soon as Peter says what's real, as soon as Peter says the truth, Jesus says, "That's it. That's what I'm talking about, Peter. That came from God himself. That came from my Father in heaven. You did not get that on your own accord. You did not figure that out for yourself. You got that from God. Peter, I want you to know, when you say that I am the Lord, that I am the Christ, the Messiah, the chosen one of God,